Tony and the cosmic adventure. No compass can steer a course to where magic lies hidden, and no modern book can ever contain the true source of life. For 13-year-old Tony, an ordinary American boy, a trip into the deep Amazon rainforest with his parents was supposed to be nothing more than a suffocating summer holiday, one entirely devoid of phone signal and video games. But the ancient Amazon is never truly silent. Within the heart of that deep emerald cathedral, an ancient secret dating back to when the earth was nothing but a cold stone is being kept by its nameless guardians. A midnight invitation to adventure, an accidental tumble beside the colossal roots of the Ancestral Soul Tree, and a single drop of blood inadvertently spilt upon a mystical Lapis Lazuli leaf, and Tony's entire world is turned upside down in the blinking of an eye. Flung into a far-flung dimension of the cosmos, Tony finds himself standing within the Lapis Lazuli Kingdom, a realm where delicate flower sprites are waging a desperate war against the Aroc, a swarm of tyrannical, mechanical monsters, to protect the very life spring of their world. Armed with neither a wand nor superpowers, the only things Tony possesses are the fated leaf upon his shoulder, the tedious biology lessons taught from his school chalkboard, and the fierce, brave heart of an Earthborn boy. Can practical science become the greatest magic of all to save an entire world? Step through the ancient curtain of hanging vines and begin the grandest journey in the universe with Tony and the Cosmic Adventure. Chapter 1. The Call of the Deep Forest and the Breath of the Ancestral Tree. The air of the Amazon rainforest was quite unlike anything Tony had ever breathed in the tidy, quiet suburbs of America. It was not merely an invisible pocket of gas. It was a living, breathing entity, thick, stiflingly hot, and heavy with the pungent scents of damp earth, tree sap that had simmered for millennia, and vibrant green mosses, multiplying madly upon every available inch of timber. Tony, who was 13 and possessed a chronically untidy thatch of hair, sat perched precariously upon a rotting log carpeted in moss, using his damp, sweat-stained baseball cap as a makeshift fan. The smartphone in his pocket had transformed into a completely useless lump of metal 3 days prior, the very moment the final bar of signal had vanished beneath the colossal canopy of the deep forest. To begin with, the absolute silence of the digital world had driven Tony nearly out of his mind. Yet now, as nightfall descended over the village of the Aruani tribe, he realized that the jungle was never truly silent. It growled, it hissed, it sang a fierce, wild symphony composed by millions of tiny, unseen creatures. His family had arrived here by way of a rather extraordinary invitation. His father, a botanist whose greatest passion lay in unmapped territories, happened to have an old friend who had lived among the Aruani for many years. Tonight was a monumental occasion for the tribe, the thanksgiving of the Ancestral Tree, a sacred ritual performed only when the moon was at its fullest, casting its silver reflection upon the churning waters of the Amazon. The clearing at the centre of the village blazed with a magnificent bonfire. Showers of crimson sparks shot high into the air, mingling with thousands of fireflies that danced through the canopy like fallen stars. The village itself was a clever cluster of palm thatch huts, a place where the boundary between mankind and nature seemed to have dissolved entirely. Tony looked around, his gaze landing upon Tupi, the chief's son. Tupi was roughly Tony's age, but the native boy possessed a wiry, athletic build, skin the colour of burnished bronze that caught the firelight, and a necklace woven from dark wooden beads. Despite lacking a common language, the two boys had quickly struck up a peculiar sort of friendship that required no words at all, forged during long afternoons spent skimming stones across the river, and moments when Tupi would expertly show Tony how to catch stag beetles with brilliantly iridescent shells. "Eat up, son. You won't find anything like this back home," Tony's father said, clapping him on the shoulder as he handed over a large banana leaf. Inside lay a beautifully charred piece of river fish, dusted with the sharp aromatic spices of the jungle, served alongside a sweet, tender root that Tupi had unearthed only that morning. All around them, the Aruani were singing. Drums carved from hollowed logs and animal hides beat a steady, deep rhythm that thudded right through Tony's ribs. Women clad in vibrant skirts of woven grass and brilliant bird feathers danced with fluid grace, their bare feet striking the earth with profound reverence. As the feast began to wind down and the night grew increasingly dense, the smaller, exhausted children curled up to sleep in hand-woven hammocks. The elders gathered closer to the fire, which had now settled into a bed of glowing embers, radiating a cozy warmth. Tony's father, driven by the unquenchable curiosity of a true scientist, turned to Chief Raoni. Chief Raoni was a man who possessed an invisible commanding authority. His face was etched with deep, heavy wrinkles that resembled the bark of an ancient mahogany tree, yet his dark eyes burned with a sharp, piercing intelligence. Tucked into his silver-streaked hair, like every member of the tribe, was a vibrant green leaf, the symbol of life and their unbreakable bond with the forest. "Chief," Tony's father said through their translating friend, "throughout the entire evening, your people have spoken constantly of the Ancestral Soul Tree. As a botanist, I've traveled the world, yet I've never encountered a single record of such a species. Does it truly exist, or is it a spiritual metaphor for your tribe?" Chief Raoni remained silent for a long while. He reached down to pick up a dry branch, gently prodding the embers. A small shower of sparks erupted, illuminating his stern, resolute profile. "No book of the modern man could ever contain the ancestral tree, my brother," Raoni said, his voice deep and resonant, like an echo from the very bowels of the earth. "It is not a tree to be studied. It is the source." Tony, who had been nodding off beside the fire, snapped awake. The story, heavily laced with ancient mystery, instantly ignited his imagination. "Since the moment I cried my first cry, the ancestral tree has stood," the chief continued slowly, his tone taking on the rhythmic cadence of an ancient hymn. "My grandfather told me that when his own grandfather was a mere child, the tree was already towering like a living mountain. None know its true age. Perhaps it sprouted when the earth was nothing but a cold, lifeless stone, and its very first root ignited life across this entire forest." He pointed a weathered finger toward the pitch-black jungle. "The water that seeps from the fissures of the ancestral tree is as clear as moonlight. A single draught can banish the most wicked malaria. Its leaves, when pressed to a wound, can knit bone and sinew, and regenerate flesh. Our ancestors were nurtured and shielded by the ancestral tree through great deluges and fiery storms. The eternal duty of the Aruani, passed from one generation to the next, is not to master the forest, but to be its nameless guardian. We protect the slumber of the ancestral tree, keeping it hidden from the eyes of those with bottomless greed." Tony's father sat with his mouth slightly open, his pencil hovering motionless over his notebook. Then, "Where is it? Could I, perhaps—" Chief Raoni offered a kind, grandfatherly smile, but shook his head firmly. The location of the ancestral tree is a secret written into the very blood of the Aruani. It lies where your compasses spin madly, where the stars are blotted out, and where only hearts beating in rhythm with the forest can ever find the way. The conversation of the adults drifted into other matters, but Tony's mind was now utterly consumed by the image of a colossal, magical tree. He shot a glance toward Tupi. The native boy was watching him, a mischievous, knowing glint in his sharp eyes. Tupi jerked his head subtly toward the dark shadows of the tree line, then pressed a single finger to his lips. An invitation to adventure. Tony's heart thudded against his ribs. He knew the absolute #1 safety rule of the expedition: never, under any circumstances, leave the camp after dark. The Amazon at night was the domain of jaguars, venomous vipers, and insects that could kill with a single bite. But the curiosity of a 13-year-old boy is a fire that cannot easily be put out. Waiting until his parents' breathing had grown heavy and rhythmic in their hammocks, Tony slipped carefully to the ground. He stepped into his sneakers, moving with the stealth of a cat to avoid any dry twigs that might snap. Tupi was already waiting at the edge of the firelight, holding a small torch coated in resin that emitted a pungent aromatic smoke to ward off the bugs. Tupi gave a sharp nod, and the two boys stepped forward, instantly swallowed by the absolute blackness of the deep forest. The trek through the nighttime jungle felt precisely like stepping onto another planet. Tony had to stay glued to Tupi's heels, doing his level best to mimic his friend's fluid, silent gait to avoid tripping over roots that rose from the ground like coiled serpents. The forest was far from pitch black. All around them, thousands of tiny mushrooms clinging to rotting logs emitted a strange, phosphorescent green glow. Colossal, night-blooming orchids burst open, filling the air with a faint luminescence, and a scent so intoxicatingly sweet it made Tony dizzy. They walked, for what felt like hours, until Tony's sense of time and direction was completely obliterated. Suddenly, Tupi came to a dead halt before a sheer vertical cliff face, entirely concealed by a dense curtain of hanging vines. The native boy parted the vines with practiced ease, revealing a narrow, dark crevice. Tupi turned to look at Tony, his expression incredibly solemn. Before stepping inside, Tony swallowed hard, gathered his courage, and squeezed his way through the rock. And then his breath was completely knocked out of him. What lay before him was not a forest. It was a cathedral of nature, a colossal, open-roofed cavern, so vastly immense it could easily have housed an entire football stadium stretched out before his eyes. And right at the very center of this grand cradle, majestic, towering, and so utterly beautiful it made one's eyes prick with tears, stood the Ancestral Soul Tree. It resembled absolutely no plant found on Earth. Its trunk was so unimaginably massive that hundreds of men linking hands could not have encircled it. Its bark was a smooth, polished ivory, radiating a soft, gentle aura, as though it had absorbed the moonlight itself. From the trunk sprouted colossal branches that wept downward like a magnificent willow, but instead of ordinary green, the leaves emitted a brilliant bioluminescent glow, sparkling like billions of stars stranded upon the earth. Luminous violet, fluorescent pink, and a clear, watery blue swirled together, creating a pulsing galaxy that rippled gently with every breath of wind. Beneath, enormous roots snaked across the cavern floor, as massive as sleeping ancient dragons. Pulses of light raced along the veins of the roots, looking for all the world like blood vessels pumping life force into the entire jungle. The air here was cool, crystal clear, and held a sacred, reverent stillness. Not even the chirp of a cricket or the rustle of the wind dared violate the silence of this place. "Oh my goodness," Tony whispered, his voice trembling and shattering in the vast space. Tupi dropped to one knee, placing a hand over his heart, and closed his eyes as he muttered a prayer in an ancient tongue. Drawn by an invisible, irresistible pull, Tony took slow, tentative steps toward the tree. He felt as though a wordless voice was soothing his mind, offering a warmth as familiar as his mother's embrace. He reached out his hands, approaching a massive root that glowed with a rich jade-green light. The moment Tony's fingertips made contact with the smooth bark, a warm, pleasant jolt of electricity shot up his arm and straight into his chest. At that exact microsecond, a gentle breeze swept through the colossal canopy far above. From a height of hundreds of feet, a single leaf detached itself from a branch. It did not tumble like an ordinary leaf. It floated, spiraling with deliberate purpose, casting off a brilliant light. The leaf was a transparent, glassy green, yet it possessed the polish and sparkle of the finest lapis lazuli stone. It drifted down with impossible gentleness, settling silently upon Tony's shoulder. Tony froze, turning his head to stare. The lapis leaf was extraordinarily beautiful. The veins running through it were not plant tissue at all. They looked like intricate microcircuits, glowing with pure, unadulterated energy. The mystical beauty of it was too much for a 13-year-old boy to bear. He raised his hand, intending to pick it up to examine it closer. But in his clumsy eagerness, his eyes glued entirely to the mesmerizing object. Tony's foot slipped upon a patch of slick moss, blanketing a jagged outcrop of rock. He lost his balance and pitched forward. "Oh!" Tony let out a sharp cry as his elbows and palms scraped violently against the jagged stones scattered around the roots. A sharp, burning sting flared through his arm. His palm was badly gashed, and bright crimson blood began to ooze from the wound. Scrambling frantically to push himself up, Tony's bleeding hand accidentally pressed flat against the lapis leaf that had knocked to the ground. A single dark drop of his blood dripped precisely onto the glowing main vein of the leaf. A tiny, faint hiss echoed like a drop of water, hitting a hot iron, though there was no heat to be felt. Tony's blood did not run off. It absorbed directly into the crystalline surface of the leaf. Instantly, the vibrant green of the lapis stone flashed with a strange, fierce crimson, and then the entirety of the leaf's veins exploded into a blinding, dazzling light that completely enveloped Tony's body. Tony opened his mouth to scream, but the sound died in his throat. He caught a fleeting glimpse of Tupi's wide, terrified eyes as his friend lunged toward him, but the image of the native boy blurred instantly, washing away like a watercolor painting caught in a downpour. The great cavern, the mystical light of the Ancestral Soul Tree, the cold stone floor, everything vanished. Tony felt his body grow weightless, as though he were floating in an infinite, timeless void. Thousands of whispering voices echoed in his ears, not in English, nor in any language he had ever known, yet his mind understood them perfectly. It was the weeping of living things, a cry for help from a distant star swallowed by a cruel, ruinous fire, and a millennium-long vigil waiting for a matching soul. The connection was forged. The seed of hope had been chosen. The blinding light gradually softened, replaced by an array of colors so brilliant and bizarre that a human boy's brain could scarcely process them. The scent of the damp Amazonian earth was gone, supplanted by a fragrance that was sweet and pure, yet carried the sharp, biting cold of metal. Tony slowly opened his eyes. He was no longer beneath the ancestral soul tree, and the life of an ordinary teenager was closed forever in that singular moment, making way for a grand destiny he was not yet prepared to face. The greatest adventure in the cosmos had just begun, all because of an accidental stumble.